Welcome to GA325 Corporate Campaigns. This is week 5, lecture 5, and this is part 1 of the presentation. Modular grids. A modular grid has a large number of horizontal and vertical guidelines, creating a matrix of cells known as modules. These types of grids provide small chunks of space for information, which can be grouped into areas called spatial zones. The size of the modules should be determined by the amount of content that's on the page. The size of an average paragraph of text, the dimensions of the page, also called the format, and all the margins and gutters. Modular grids are helpful when working with tables and lists, and mostly large amounts of information that needs to be visually organized in a way that's not too overwhelming for the viewer and easily allows them to be able to skim through things. For instance, catalog would be a good example of this. The modular grid system. Modular grid systems, due to their large number of small blocks, not only produce an extremely orderly layout of text and images, but it also allows flexibility in placement of various sized and shaped elements. Gaps of empty white areas can be varied by leaving one or more blocks empty. The blue shapes represent text areas and imagery such as photographs, illustrations, and charts. And notice how these can overlap into different modules. So the bottom right corner, as you could kind of see, there's a large blue square that takes up 4 different modules. That's fine. And same with the upper left corner that has kind of a vertical 3 modules that are made up by one block. That's fine as well. What it does do allow you to keep that kind of content that's a little larger or smaller still aligned properly with all the other areas. Grid development. Type-driven design is dominant by content, text, typographic elements, tables, lists, and charts. Image-based projects are the opposite. They're dominated by photos, illustrations, and graphics. Designers do not choose a grid randomly and then try to make the images and type fit into the grid. In fact, it is done in the opposite manner. A graphic artist will examine the size and proportions of imagery either manually or with a rough dummy or on the computer within a print-oriented software program like InDesign. If it is a text-oriented page, font size, volume of data, and typographic elements may be examined to determine what type of grid will work best. Text can also determine the size of column width. Image-based grid development. For image-based layout, the artist can arrange the images that are going to be used together and determine what proportion each picture will be compared to the overall format that's being used. Once the largest, smallest, highest, and widest images have all been organized, the space can then be broken up into those modules and spaces that will organize these pictures in an orderly fashion. And this might take time. As you have all your elements on the page, you start to lay them out, you'll figure out that certain ones need to continue to be scaled down or moved around or scaled up, things like that. So it is a trial by error, and every type of layout's going to be a little bit different because the content is always going to vary. There may be areas of text that will need to be calculated into this formula as well. Since it is rare to have print pages with no type at all, you've got to consider that amount of text, and usually the size of that's going to matter, and the amount of text, and also the size or the width of the columns. Image-based grid building. You now have a page with sized images arranged and with bleed taken into account. Guidelines can be drawn over the top of the layout that will divide up the arrangement in an organized, orderly manner. As you can kind of see here, those blue areas are for the images, so the artist has kind of laid everything out and got it all the way that it needs to be laid out. Now the text can be fit between those other white modular areas. Once that text is fit in, still there might need to be some adjustments on the images. So it's about maybe going back and forth until making those changes until you find kind of like that perfect layout. So again, a little bit more of trial and error. With text-based grid development, given a vast amount of writing to fit on several pages, will require the typesetter to estimate how many lines of type will appear on each page. So the total word count plays into that factor. Optimal setting for the text at a given size and font will indicate the column width, and then how many side-by-side columns can fit on that one page. And that also depends on the format. At this point, the designer can tweak the type size, spacing, and margin. Just make those minor types of adjustments that you need to in order to kind of get everything to fit on that page in an orderly and organized fashion. This approach to text layout will allow a grid to generate from the type arrangement. One of the most compelling tasks for the designer is to work with all the various type sizes on a page. Since body type, captions, callouts, and sidebars may all have different point sizes and leading, estimate how much content will go on the page, then set up the other text components and images. Once this is roughed out, you can easily choose a modular size and grid type that will line up the page elements in the optimal manner. And once that is done, you can kind of continue to keep making those fine-tune adjustments by going back and forth between different text areas, such as your body copy, captions, and callouts and such. Grid hybrid. Multiple grids may be necessary for some print jobs. A grid with a large, precise number of modules can be used for a variety of columns. This approach will continue a rhythm because it does not change in an overall alignment. So a 20 module grid can be used to fit a 5, 4, 3, or 2 type of column. So it's just making those slight adjustments to allow those larger margins or gutters or more space for different captions. That concludes this portion of the presentation. Stay tuned for part 2.